guest is the Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so you got it. Well, just real quick, what do you think of that? I mean, there was the same thing with the auto industry. I mean, if they're producing chips, if they can't produce enough because of taxes or regulations, we give them $50 billion. If they don't produce a great chip because they're not winning in the free market, they're getting government money. If they can't sell the chips or they can't make a profit, but they've got all these jobs they got to hold on to, right? Because no politician likes to watch factories close. Then we got to subsidize them even more.
Yeah, it's unbelievable because we have $400 billion going out the door here, primarily to subsidize American industry. And of course, we want a strong manufacturing sector in this country, but this is done so at the behest of the politicians. We choose this industry to subsidize, and this one we're going to penalize. In fact, if you look at the big tax bill that was passed just a couple of weeks ago, it has a huge corporate minimum tax. The industry that is most penalized by this is manufacturing. Manufacturing, because there are tax breaks, there are deductions built into the tax code that are traditionally very favorable to our manufacturing sector. So with one hand, they're giving out subsidies. With the other one, they are enacting tax penalties on this same industry.
Yeah, it seems like we're in a cycle of if a business is failing, we subsidize it. If it's succeeding, we tax it. You have 8 ways to reduce inflation. I'm looking at them right here. I'm going to skip past the first one because that one's so obvious, increase energy production. But the number 2 one you have here is encourage more personal savings. I really like that because I've been hot on this. I'm watching the government, whether it's with education or transportation or affirmatively furthering fair housing or the Green New Deal and the green energy stuff. It's like they're saying, don't own anything, borrow it from government. So don't save your own money. Let us save it for you. And then when you need some, we'll give it back to you from time to time.
Yeah, and savings is absolutely critical, not just to make sure people have enough when they retire or when they send their kids off to college. It's actually good for inflation. It actually suppresses inflation if people spend money putting it into their 401ks, into their IRAs, rather than using that money to go out and purchase a new TV or a car or what have you. So this is a very, very important plank here. There are some proposals on the table that have been introduced by members of Congress, things like increasing the contribution limits for certain retirement accounts. These things would go a long way to giving people more incentive to squirrel away their own money rather than going out and spending it and pouring more gasoline on the inflationary fire that's been raging for over a year now.
You listen to all these left-wing economists like Krugman and Reich. They actually think there should be a tax on savings. Like if more money needs to be in the economy, then you tax it at the savings account. If you want more people to save, then they always think that they could just, I guess, mega mind all this stuff and plan the economy. You can't plan it. You can't plan these things. You people aren't smart enough. You can't just put people around a table. And if you could, the Federal Reserve would be doing great. We wouldn't have a debt or a deficit. This idea that central planning is going to save us, it's not. But the idea of increasing personal property or private property offends left-wing thinking.
Yeah, it does, because what they'd like to see is a full cradle-to-grave subsidization from the government to your lives, and that, of course, includes Social Security. Social Security is great in a lot of ways, and it's great for certain people, but it's not the end-all, be-all when it comes to personal savings because there's not enough money. The accounts have been absolutely drawn down to the ridiculous levels where we're going to see a bankrupting of the Social Security Trust Fund in coming years. So people can't rely on Social Security. They need to save for themselves. And they can't rely on the government by any stretch of the imagination because it does a lousy job in budgeting and squirreling away money and making sure that you have a comfortable retirement.
Fix the tax code and avoid unfair tax hikes. You know, I'm a fan of both the fair and the flat tax proposals. I'm kind of leaning more. I was a flat tax guy. I'm leaning more towards the fair tax because I don't see anything in the Constitution that says the government needs to know how much money we make. That's something that's used for politics, for class warfare, that kind of thing. But the progressive tax code is unfair because it's not equal protection under the law.
Right, and I think what happened in 2017 is we took steps toward a flatter tax. We can condense some of the tax rates. We increased the standard deduction, in fact, doubled the standard deduction, and that shifted a lot of people, millions of people, away from itemizing their taxes and to taking the standard deduction. The problem is the standard deduction hasn't increased in a manner that's kept up with inflation, so you see more people pushed back into that itemization category, where taxes are much more complicated. They are a headache, And of course, the IRS is little to no help. In fact, they tend to be on the other side of almost all of these questions. So here we have a simple solution. Increase the standard deduction to keep pace with inflation. Things like the child tax credit, we can index those for inflation as well. There's no indexing built into the child tax credit. Working families rely on that tax credit to make sure they keep their tax liabilities low. So changing the tax code goes a long way there to insulating people from the effects of inflation.
You say cut the regulatory red tape. I love that, but Joe Biden didn't tell you in that speech that the reason why we don't make a lot of semiconductors in this country is because the EPA so heavily regulates the raw materials. Same thing with the electric vehicle batteries, right? There was a moratorium on rare earth mining. So I guess it's safe to mine it in Chile. You just can't mine it here. But if you're going to say we need to produce something, but then you make it impossible to produce it, the cost of producing it goes up, which requires even more government subsidies, which creates more inflation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see this all the time. The politicians talk out of both sides of their mouth. Manchin cut this big deal before signing off on Biden's massive tax bill. That side deal was supposed to expedite the permitting process. But of course, that's held up in limbo because he forgot to get a sign off from the other members of his Democratic conference before proceeding and giving up his vote. It was a huge strategic mistake. And now taxpayers could pay the price for it because I don't think, I'm not super optimistic about getting this permitting reform across the finish line right now. Manchin should have gotten that in place before he gave away his vote on this horrible tax bill.
You say cut the tariffs. One place I'll point that out, when the baby formula shortage happened, the government had to scramble. Well, part of the reason why we couldn't bring in that high-quality European baby formula immediately was because of tariffs.
Yeah, we have protectionist policies in place. We should have been able to immediately get baby formula from safe, partnered, allied countries like Canada, like Western Europe. I understand apprehension about bringing in
I'm sorry, I ran out of time. I lost track of time. But some of that formula was actually better, and we couldn't get it. Brandon, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely right.